Thanks again for joining us for our study of Genesis, which soon is not going to be a study of Genesis anymore. We're going
What
to be
is it
moving
going to
on to.
be?
I don't know that I want to reveal it quite yet. It's going to be
Okay.
something from the New Testament, and yeah, I'll say
I
that.
have not voted yet, so.
That's also why I have not revealed it because I know it takes two to tango on determining
We're
determining what we're doing here.
also have a new name.
We might also have a new name. The names that I have been workshopping thus far, Adrian has not approved almost any of. Um,
You can tell the one you really like that I said was terrible.
Gluten-free daily bread.
No.
Like, so the give us today our daily bread petition of
We
the Lord's Prayer.
understand it, we just
And
don't like
daily bread is
it.
one of the most commonly used devotionals like that exists out there. It's a commonly used term for
Why is
devotionals.
it gluten free? Because you're
And it's
so
gluten,
cool.
not because it's cool, but gluten
No, because
free.
you're so cool.
No, but because in the past 10 years or whatever, people have really gotten on the gluten free kick. And the concept would be it's devotionals for people that don't sound out of date. It's devotionals like daily studies that are aware of current times and struggles and all that stuff.
Okay, okay.
I'm talking myself back into the name right now, even as we speak. But so gluten free daily bread was one, exercising the demons was one. Infinite depth is something. So I have a couple different books that I'm
Yeah, that one's pretty good.
long term kind of sketching.
That you're writing?
Yeah, that are probably about 10 to 15 years out. So the infinite depth is one.
It's directly correlated to how much I work.
More beautiful truth is another one. Um, and one step closer is a name that I really like that we might be going with too. So we'll figure it out long term. But yeah. Anyways, for now, it's just James and Aid's Daily Bible Study, the least original name for a daily Bible study of all time. So, but we are on Genesis 41, and make sure. Oh, go ahead.
It gets the point across. It's us, it's daily, and it's a Bible study.
It's really, yep.
It's bread and butter.
It's a little on the
Gluten free
nose.
bread and butter.
Yeah, it's very utilitarian. Okay, so make sure you read through your copy of Genesis 41 at home. Here is my summary, which I might get yelled at because it's kind of long, but God was the one who wrote it first, and it was a really long chapter, although he didn't put the chapter
Yeah,
divisions.
exactly.
I know.
He also didn't write the headings.
Yes.
I'm just kidding.
I know,
You always say that.
I do say that. It's a lot. This one's got two of them. Pharaoh's dreams and Joseph in charge of Egypt. So here's my personal summary for Genesis 41. 2 years after the chief cupbearer has been released from prison and he had forgotten about Joseph, we're told that Pharaoh has a dream. And in his dream, Pharaoh was standing by the Nile River, and out of it came 7 fat cows that grazed on the land. After that came 7 skinny cows. The skinny, ugly cows ate the fat cows, and then Pharaoh woke up. Then he falls back asleep right after that, and he has another dream. 7 thin, scorched heads of grain ate 7 healthy, good heads of grain. In the morning, Pharaoh went to his advisors and asked them if anybody had any idea what this could possibly mean. He's assuming it's from the gods or something, again, because they came in 2 dreams like that, generally signified in the ancient world. This is something from the divine. Nobody had any ideas, but the cupbearer said, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings." And he told the story about himself and the chief baker when they were in prison and how a young Hebrew named Joseph was there and helped them interpret their dreams. So Pharaoh sends for Joseph, and once Joseph was like cleaned up and all that stuff, he appears before Pharaoh. And Joseph said, "Yeah, I can't interpret the dream, but God can." So notice Joseph, even there's a little bit of transformation here from his early days where he's trying to say, look at what you guys are going to bow down to me and whatever. Joseph's been humbled down to the point now where he says, nope, I'm not really much of anything. God is capable of a great deal though. So Pharaoh shared the dreams about the skinny cows and the withered grain, and Joseph explained that the dreams both tell basically the same truth. God is telling Pharaoh that the good cows and good grain represent 7 good, fruitful years, but the bad cows, the bad grain, represent 7 years of famine that are going to come right after that. And Joseph said that the dream was given in 2 forms to prove that God had already predetermined that this was going to happen. It was going to happen very soon, in fact. Joseph then suggested that Pharaoh look for a wise and discerning man to be put in charge over all of Egypt's food economics for the upcoming years, and he suggested that a fifth of the harvest in the good years be put into storage for the subsequent bad years. Pharaoh said that Joseph is clearly the wise, discerning man that God would intend for this. He puts Joseph in charge of the land, and we're told kind of a specific line that says the throne was the only thing that made Pharaoh more powerful than Joseph at this point. Okay, so the second part of the chapter then goes on to say Pharaoh took his signet ring, his marking ring, and placed it, so his signature, placed it on Joseph's finger. And Joseph was dressed in royal robes and gold chains, and he rode in chariots. He was praised by all the people. By Pharaoh's own admission, Joseph essentially ruled over Egypt. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zephanath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On, to be his wife. Joseph was 30 years old at the time when he entered into Pharaoh's courts. He traveled throughout the land and managed the entire area according to his plan with the grain. During the 7 years of abundance, the storehouses were built and they were overflowing with grain, and Joseph eventually stopped keeping track because there was so much abundance and it was impossible to account. During the good years, Joseph also has two sons. The first was named Manasseh, which was related to the fact that it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. That's something that the language is related to that. The second son was named Ephraim, and he says, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. Eventually, the 7 years of famine began, and Egypt cried to Pharaoh for food. Pharaoh told everyone to go to Joseph and do whatever Joseph said. Joseph then opened up the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, and the whole world after that actually started coming to Egypt to buy grain, developing Egypt as in even greater detail as the world power. That's Genesis 41, my summary.
Yeah, what did Joseph's new name mean?
It's a good question. Zaphanath-Paneah. Off the top of my head, I cannot recall what that name means, although I'm sure...
This commentary says... It doesn't say in your commentary.
I'm sure it does. I didn't read through my
God
specific
speaks
commentary.
and lives.
God speaks and lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what verse is that?
45.
Okay.
So did Pharaoh start believing in the God of Joseph?
So
I'm
it
guessing
wasn't.
not.
It's not that. So there's two thoughts in there. It's not that big of a deal for a polytheistic society to add one more God.
That's true.
Number two, adding that God does not mean that that person is a believer at that point.
Yeah.
Because unless you're exclusively worshiping the true God, you're not at all worshiping the true God. Basically, just long story short, one of the reasons I don't remember it is because my commentary says that we basically don't know what it means, the name. So
mine is much more willing to take a stand.
When you just don't know, I'd rather not say oh yeah, here's what it means authoritatively.
Why didn't God give Pharaoh his dreams sooner? Why did it take 2 years?
Yeah, that's going to be part of the whole sovereignty thing that we talk about here, that we don't know. God doesn't tell us exactly why. I think part of it, so remember, what is God doing with Joseph since his proud childhood or proud days as a young man? What is the intention of God for Joseph?
He's humbling him.
He's humbling him. So far as I can tell, there's no shortcut. So you can't just, you got thrown in prison. Okay, well now I'm humble. It takes years and years and years to develop spiritual development and gifts like humility. And so I think Joseph has to repeatedly be broken down by the world. It's the same thing that I think when eventually someday we'll look at Exodus, and I think it's fantastically telling that Moses was born and raised in the court of the king. And for 40 years, he's been groomed his entire life he's calibrated to lead a nation. And so when he kills a guy, and by virtue of the fact that he's killing a guy means he's probably proud. He thinks he has the right to take a life. I don't see how that's anything else but an expression of pride. And essentially somebody catches him. They said they're going to tell on him to Pharaoh. And he has to go to Midian, and there he lives as a farmer for 40 years. All that education, what does he do? He follows, sheep. He's a shepherd, which required almost no education. It was a trade. And so, like, the point is, it isn't until he's 80 years old that God says, okay, now that you've been humbled for the past 40 years, are you capable of leading? And I think the same thing's happening with Joseph.
Yeah.
You're not qualified to lead anybody. You're too full of yourself. You're too arrogant. You're too whatever, which is, I mean, if you're going to be in any kind of Christian leadership moving forward, that's an important quality. Like, to be full of oneself. Confidence is one thing, but what you're confident in and how you value yourself versus anybody you're over is a really important concept. So,
And then whose crops are these that Joseph can just say, are these Egypt's crops?
yes.
Oh,
Yep.
the government owns them to feed, or no, I guess it's not a government. It would be Pharaoh owns them to feed Pharaoh's household.
Yeah. So Pharaoh already owns a ton of property, is our understanding. But what's going to happen moving forward is he's going to become, the rich get richer in the sense that when the Egyptians first come, essentially what he's going to have them do, and this is going to be in subsequent chapters, but what he's going to have them do is essentially they are selling off their land to Pharaoh.
So this is not social welfare.
How so? What
I
do you
mean, he's not just providing food for all the people of Egypt for nothing.
They're working.
Yeah.
They're working their own land in exchange for this food. So like Egypt is going to, during the years of famine, they're going to start to starve. The government through Pharaoh has stored up an insane amount of food. They're going to start giving people food as a handout, but specifically for the payment of their land. And then they're going to say, you can still eat off of your land, but the land is ours, and a percentage of it, you have to give the product, the yield, to us. And so Egypt will continue to gain power and continue to gain more land, even as the people are being provided for. So it's in some respects a little bit of a win-win for both the people of Egypt and Pharaoh.
Well, except they're losing their land.
They're losing their land, but they are getting they are acquiring the world's wealth because all the world is going to come to Egypt. And if they have food that they can now sell, they're making they might have lost some land, but they're making a good profit off of it. So, but yes, it is certainly in Pharaoh's best interest any way you slice it.
Yeah.
So, all right, the devotional thoughts. You can probably guess what the first one is. We're going to talk thought number one. At home, you can probably say it with me by this point. We're going to talk about God's sovereignty. The details. So again, the recurring theme that we've gotten into here, not only God's sovereignty in the details, but his hand even in the dreams. And he allows Pharaoh 2 dreams here. He allows, the wise men have no capacity to interpret it at all. The details attached to the cupbearer who now remembers, Joseph's unique ability that he encountered several years ago when he himself was in prison. And you say, okay, well, what are the odds that Pharaoh would just randomly have these kinds of dreams? They're clearly not random. It's clearly from God. And the whole situation is clearly evidence of the fact that God is in control. God is not just controlling Pharaoh's subconscious, which is an amazing thing to think about. He's interrupting somebody's thought process while they're non-conscious. He's also going to interrupt the weather patterns in the next 14 years so that there are 7 years of abundance and really good yield, because obviously farming is largely based on the factors of weather attached to it. And then 7 really poor years. So like God, down to the details of the subconscious all the way up to the weather patterns, God is in control of the entire thing. And the application, again, is all the details of your life. And it's not just your life. It's not just your thoughts and your subconscious thoughts. It's all the seasons. God is working the seasons out in such a way so as to benefit you somehow in the long run, which is a humbling thing to think about. So, again, God's sovereignty. Let's get that point out of the way here to begin with. Second devotional thought for the day is the impending prosperity and famine. Again, God not only controls the dreams, he controls the seasons. He can create prosperous years. He can create harsh years. Think about this in terms of today, too. I think if you go back to the recession of 2008, 2009, so 10 years ago, and now obviously what we're going through currently with a pandemic, and pandemic isn't just health issues, but it's economic issues and all that. The fact that, so I remember once hearing it put like this, in 2008, 2009. Why did that happen? Like if you ask 1,000 different economic experts, even in retrospect, they can tell you kind of why it happened. Well, even if you can explain, even if there's any consensus after it happens, why didn't you predict that then?
This is
Like-
what I don't understand. So even last Christmas when I wanted a pair of Doc Martens and they were sold out for weeks and weeks and weeks, like, isn't it someone's job to know how many people are going to want to buy Doc Martens in Christmas 2019?
Yes, okay, so who does their job perfectly? In the same way that, like nobody, the point is none of us can anticipate what the reality of humanity, right? Even though it's somebody's job, even though they're the best possible experts who read all the best data, like how on earth does, like since the Great Depression, you'd think we would have every possible system in place so that another enormous recession couldn't happen.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I feel like all of the financial people were saying, like, it's clearly going to happen. We've had so many years of, I don't know, teddy bear market, whatever, rabbit market, that eventually it's going to, go on the downswing or whatever. But obviously no one was saying because of a pandemic, like there's going to be this weird virus and that's why.
If somebody could predict that stuff with 100% accuracy, they'd be easily the most powerful person on the planet. If somebody could have, like, if somebody, you notice you don't see anybody pointing back to articles or videos from November of 2019 saying, okay, we have information that suggests if this market in Wuhan continues to sell food the way it does or whatever. And I don't want to turn into it like, where did pandemics come from? But my point is nobody predicted it. Nobody actually predicted it, and we're willing to like push all their chips in on it. And part of that is because you can't. You can't totally. You can see general patterns, but you can't like when will those patterns take place? You can't do it either for economics. You can't do it for health, and you can't do it because God controls it to some extent.
Did you know that even the flu vaccine is designed 10 years or no, maybe it's 2 years. 2 years earlier they're just predicting what the strain of flu will be in 2 years, and it only is accurate like 10% of the time.
Right. So which is kind of like a good metaphor for how humans are living.
You should still get it to be safe. It doesn't hurt.
This opinion has not been endorsed by only one member of the Hine household and in no
You always get a flu
organizations.
shot.
I do get a flu shot, but point is you can't predict any of that stuff, and you never will be able to predict any of that stuff. Even when humanity makes advances that are that much farther, you can't say with any significant amount of authority because you'd have to be able to control God. The universe is not just some giant computer program that you can adjust the coding to and therefore tweak the results on the other end. There is a divine force and being attached to all of it. And he controls things, again, right down to our subconscious, all the way up to the weather patterns and those types of things. So I think since you can only control this much of your life, which again is from a emotional and psychological wellness perspective, from a addiction recovery perspective, that is one of the essential steps, is to say, I'm not in control of my life. I'll make myself miserable. I'll make everybody around me miserable if I think I am. So I forfeit this concept of control. And the aim for the believer then is not to control the results, since there's so many other factors attached to results. Like if I work hard, then I can do this, and then I'll be, a multimillionaire or whatever, unless the stock market collapses, in which I have no control over that. So you don't control that stuff. You control this much. So don't aim for success. Don't aim for happiness. Don't aim for whatever. Aim for the glory of God. Don't aim for safety. Don't aim for prosperity. Aim for the glory of God. So Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, seek first my kingdom and my righteousness, and all those other things that I'm in control of, I'll take care of them for you. So we are in the grand scheme of, we are the flowers of the field. We are the birds of the air. We have very little control over the world around us. And so don't try to control the world. You're just going to make yourself miserable. Try to glorify God in what you're doing every day from wherever you are, and let him work the rest of the results out. Okay, so that's the prosperity and famine and the lack of control we have over life. The third devotional thought is,
I really like that thought. You're not giving me time to process things.
all right, go ahead.
I mean, it's just for people who like to be able to do things, like that is one thing that you actually can do. Like that kind of gives you like more of a purpose and more of like if my goal is just to glorify God today, like that I can do. Or I can, it's
Yeah.
an action step.
Everybody can do it. When you're 3 years old or you're 93 years old, when you feel the least like you can contribute something to society or control the environment around you, you can still glorify God. And whether if you're in a prison cell, like notice Joseph could do just as good of a job glorifying God from his prison cell as he could. That's part of that's part of the point of this story, is you can glorify God from a prison cell just as much as you can from the throne of a king of a country.
How do you glorify God though?
By seeking Him first, Him and His righteousness.
What does that mean?
Yeah, it means submitting to His will and sharing His goodness in all things. So the example we looked at in the last chapter was Joseph. He's managing just a really little amount of prisoners. Like nobody notices them, nobody cares about them, nobody would be hurt if they died, anything. But he notices when they have a bad day. He noticed their faces were downcast. And so, like, he's glorifying God. He's not getting any attention for it. In fact, even from the very people that he's helping, they're going to totally forget about him.
Yeah.
But he's glorifying God, and that's the point. You can't control the outcome. You can't control the final says of things. So don't try to control, like, living for people's acclaim. I think anybody who's constantly just pandering to the world is going to end up in some way being rejected by the world. Like, I think we all kind of understand that intuitively. If you try too hard to get people to like you, what they end up doing is really not liking you. And so stop trying to do that. Just seek to glorify God, and that actually becomes a very attractive character. So whatever your circumstances in life, whether this is, I just had a conversation with somebody the other day about the concept of vocation, that you can glorify God. You can and you do glorify God from whatever your work is. In other words, a pastor's work is not inherently more spiritual than anybody else's work, because you can glorify God from every position equally, whatever that calling might be. So whatever your calling in life is, whether you're retired or you're a little kid or you're a student or you're a pastor or you're a businessman or a businesswoman or a doctor, or do what you can to arrange the raw material of the environment around you in such a way that it glorifies God by serving and loving humanity ahead of self. I think that's, maybe more what your question is. How do you do that? How do you glorify God? Instead of taking stuff around you and making it about me, take the stuff around you and use it to serve other people ahead of self. Because that's the triune God's instinct.
Yes.
Sorry. Did you have...
No. Good.
Okay. Third thought then is Joseph's wise stewardship. So we just got done saying God is in control. God is in control of all of this, very clearly. God being in control, this is where humans tend to think one or the other, either or thinking. Yeah. God being in control does not let us off the hook of being responsible. So even though we control the 0.3% of life, we're responsible for managing that 0.3% and doing so in a way that it glorifies God. And so it's not as though we have no control. We don't have nearly as much control as we might want or think we do, but we don't have no control. We have a little bit to manage. And Joseph, he absolutely takes responsibility for, okay, if you're going to make me somebody who's in charge of the food economics of the kingdom, here's what I'm going to do. And he says, okay, we're going to have 7 abundant years. I'm going to take 1/5 of that, so 20% of it. I'm going to build storehouses to put all that extra grain in, and I'm going to keep track of it. And he keeps these very careful ledger of stuff. Like his books are immaculate,
Until he can't. He didn't have a calculator.
Yes.
So.
Well, there's that. If he would have been audited, I'm sure Joseph would have been like totally on track with where he was supposed to be until it becomes so fortunate that it's incalculable. But the point is, he's keeping track of it, or at least he's trying to. And I think that he doesn't just say, God is going to bless us, great, and we should just store stuff up, and then he keeps track of it, and he plans.
Do you think that 20% is like a guideline? Like, you should be saving 20%?
I don't think so, no. I think, I mean, that you could get, and I have seen and read some stuff as far as business advice based on the Bible. I think the thing that you got to keep in mind is that the Bible wasn't ultimately written to give us business advice.
Yeah, but like I would say that the Old Testament tithe is like a good guideline for like an offering.
Right. I think it's.
I mean, this wasn't like actually God's law. This was just what.
No, we don't find that used anywhere else, nor does Jesus affirm it. So that's where I would say the big difference to me is with the tithe.
Sure.
Is Jesus in the New Testament basically says something that kind of affirms the goodness of the tithe.
Yeah.
He doesn't comment on this, and nor is it mentioned anywhere else. So whether it's just good management or whether it was specifically a number that God had given him, we don't know exactly what the circumstances of it were, but it clearly works out well. And the planning and the management and the details and all of that, I think, are part of Joseph's faithfulness as well. And I think the application point then is that whatever we steward in life, whatever we manage in life, we understand that Christians are not just like reckless, but they're good managers of whatever physical blessings God has entrusted to our care. The other piece to this that I think is really interesting is the skills that Joseph has developed over the years. So remember, when we first meet Joseph, he is a shepherd, but he's kind of in a management role, or at least he views himself kind of that way. You know, he's annoying about it a little bit, but maybe Dad has kind of put him in that role too, but he's sort of managing the other shepherds too. And then we see him at Potiphar's house, and he's such a good manager that he becomes the main manager of the entire house. And then he has to go to prison, but he gets put into management in prison because so like the point is, he has some native gifts attached to this, but God has had him at least have 3 other jobs prior to this point by which he was in charge of managing stuff. And I think whatever skills, in order to do what God essentially calls you to do to advance his kingdom, God has this interesting way of helping you develop those skills throughout your life, even though you might have never really known what you were doing. You know, so Joseph learned how to manage shepherds. He learned how to manage like the staff of the house. He learned how to manage prisoners. He learned how to, you know, people that he was going to be working with essentially throughout Egypt. And he has this tremendous resume of management, and it probably felt so meaningless to him at some point. Like, what good does it do me, you know, organizing the prisoners, you know, and stuff like that? What good does it do me shepherding in the grand scheme of a high-powered CEO job? But point is, God, by his sovereign knowledge, his foreknowledge, he is discipling you right now in ways that you might not choose for yourself in order to carry out ministry through you and build his kingdom in the long run. All right, so I think that's everything here on Genesis 41. If you don't have anything to add, we will close with a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for, again, being with us today in our study. We again see your sovereign hand in the details of life. We see that you control things down to our dreams at night, potentially, all the way up to the weather patterns. And all of this you do in order to work out for our good. Lord, even though we can't always explain it, we're not given the same kind of gift necessarily that Joseph has been given. Help us simply to know and believe that you are in control, working things out for our good. We don't need to understand so long as we trust that you understand, and that if we simply seek first your kingdom and your righteousness, all the other details will work themselves out. No matter what our estate, Lord, whether from the thrones of life or the prison cells of life, help us to continue to seek that goal of glorifying you in all that we do. In your name we pray. Amen. Thanks for joining us for our study of Genesis 41. We'll see you tomorrow for 42.